Well, good evening and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. We're glad you're a part of this gathering. Many have the opportunity to call in at various times, whatever's convenient for you. We are glad that you're able to be a part of this study. Today has been a cold day. I guess it's dogwood winter. A little chill in the air, a little rain falling, and we're still in that in-between season between winter and spring, and it won't be long until we'll know the fullness of spring. Let me point out that tonight is our last lesson in this particular book. We're studying the book of Genesis, and there are two books that deal with that. First, we have part 1, which we complete tonight, and then we'll begin part 2 next Wednesday evening. You should receive a notice from the church office either today or later in the week telling you that the second volume of our study will be available at all the entrances on Sunday when you come for worship, or it's available in the office if you would like to come by and pick up your copy. But we'll begin the first lesson in that volume next Wednesday night. Tonight we're going to be looking at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, one of the bleakest pictures in all the Bible. We'll deal with Genesis chapter 19. Specifically, we're going to look at verses 12 through 29. But we need to introduce our lesson by thinking about what happens in those first 11 verses of that chapter. Chad Ramsey tells us in his commentary on the lesson for tonight that there are two great destructions that are described in the book of Genesis. The first is the flood that covers the entire earth and kills everything that's left except Noah and his family and the animals that survive in the ark. The second great destruction is the one that we look at tonight. It is the fall of brimstone and fire that destroyed what were called the cities of the plain. There are 5 of them: Sodom, Gomorrah, Zoar, Admah, and Zeboam. A little later in our lesson, we discover that Zoar is excused from this, but the other 4 cities are destroyed. The people of that region were noted for their extreme wickedness, so extreme that Jude, in his brief letter, describes them as having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh. Jude, verse 7. Again, one of the bleakest pictures in all the Bible. It's terrible when a whole society just loses their stronghold, loses their security, and gone in the wrong directions. When human beings lose all sense of decency, how low can they go? Psalm chapter 11 offers what I think is a pretty good commentary on this event, and I'd like for us to begin by looking at a portion of Psalm 11. This commentary begins by asking a question. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? There's a point at which there are foundational beliefs and practices. And when those are destroyed, what can the righteous who are left do? When society turns against that which is normal and right, what are the righteous to do? Well, the commentary goes on with these words. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids test the sons of men. He honors God with his own place, well aware of what's taking place down below as he looks down from heaven, from his temple. And then the psalmist says, the Lord tests the righteous, but the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. Upon the wicked he will rain coals, fire and brimstone, and a burning wind shall be the portion of their cup. In light of what we're going to be studying tonight, that's a very apt description. When God looks down and sees all the things that he cannot approve of, he sees the violence, he sees the lack of morality and the lack of standards. He pours out coals and fire and brimstone. They become a portion of the cup that the world is left to drink. Well, so were Sodom and Gomorrah. Cities that are always paired. We talk about them in terms of the two of them, but there were those other two cities of the plain as well. They're identified often in the rest of the Bible, some by prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel, all mention Sodom and Gomorrah. They are described by Jesus, who mentions them twice in his ministry, and they are described in two of the New Testament epistles. They are mentioned first in 2 Peter, and then we've just cited a passage from Jude where they are mentioned. So their story kind of runs through the scriptures as a serious reminder what happens when we lose our standards. They belong to that company of people that Jeremiah described as having forgotten how to blush. When I'm no longer shocked, when I'm no longer embarrassed, the foundations have been destroyed, and what's left to be done. Last week we focused on Abraham as the friend of God. One writer has suggested that as we study the story of Lot, we might talk about the friend of the world. They have different affections, different attachments. It's time now to consider Lot in that role. The Bible says he pitched his tent towards Sodom. He followed up by pitching his heart towards Sodom and moved into the city. In the opening section of chapter 19, our text for tonight, two men come to see Lot. They are two of those three who visited Abraham in a previous lesson. They came with a promise that he and Sarah would have a son. His name would be Isaac. Abraham poured out abundant hospitality to his guest. When these two men, who are angels, come to Lot, he offers some measure of hospitality, but not to the extent that Abraham offered. They tell Lot they will just sleep out in the square that night. Obviously, the weather was nice, and it was a good open place, and they'd just rest there. Lot said, "You can't do that. You must stay in my house." He insisted because he knew the dangers that they would face by staying out in the open. So he brought them into his own house. It's interesting that when the angels first came upon Lot, he's described as sitting at the gate of the city. That's kind of typically described as a position of honor in the Old Testament. Those who sat at the gate often were judges, rendering judgments where disputes existed. Lot was so accepted by the people that they let him sit at the gate. Later, when the men of Sodom insisted that Lot's guests be brought out to them that they might sexually abuse them, Lot tries to stop them by calling them "my brethren." Has he bought into that culture so much that he just closes his eyes to what they're doing? And he treats them as his brethren. This is not the Lot who benefited from the influence of Abraham, nor is he the Lot Abraham prayed for over and over. Our text picks up with the angels insisting that Lot and his family must leave this city. The time has come for drastic measures to be taken. And when God sends two angels down to protect a man, that says something. While you and I read about Lot and we're concerned about where he's put himself, I must be honest to say that the Apostle Peter refers to him as righteous Lot. You remember that Abraham offered all kinds of offers to God. If we can find 50 righteous people or 30, or he comes on down to 10 righteous people, but none were to be found. Lot was a righteous man, Peter says, but even he couldn't bring about sparing the city. And so our Bible lesson is divided into typically our three sections, and we're going to begin by talking about insistence. What is it we need to do right now? There are times when the need is so great The urgency is so real that we can't wait, we can't delay, we can't postpone, we can't put it all off. Let's look at the first few verses, verses 12 through 15. Then the men said to Lot, these are the two angels that have come, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But to his sons-in-law he seemed to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot to hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. The angels show how urgent their message is. Lot had tarried too long in Sodom, and now if he's going to survive, he must depart. The angels, you notice, inquire about the number of his household. Just as God was concerned about Noah and his household, there's a concern about Lot and his household. And the angels want to know who's in your house, who belongs here. Whoever it is, whatever the number may be, you must take them out of this house. You must escape. And their insistence was not just to protect Lot and the others from the influence of Sodom. It was to protect them from the coming destruction. They did not need to be destroyed with the rest of the city. My read of this account is that Lot's family did include a number of people. It included his wife. It included sons who were never identified by name. It included daughters with their husbands. We find out there are sons-in-law. And it included two unmarried daughters who were still living at home. Lot took that urgent message to his sons-in-law and obviously to the daughters married to them, urging them to behave just as God had said and to depart. His sons-in-law thought he was joking. What does that tell us about how Lot had communicated with them earlier about the Lord? What had he said about God and his will and his word? Isn't it sad that when you and I finally say something to somebody about what the Lord expects, they laugh. They think we're joking. We're not very serious. Lot's seriousness was up for ridicule. And so they refused to leave. And we're left with Lot and his wife and those two unmarried daughters. Obviously, as I said, he previously said very little about the Lord, and when he did, they read it as a joke. With morning, the angels urged Lot to hurry, to take his wife and two daughters living at home. One of Lot's saddest actions had come earlier in the first part of this chapter when he had offered those two daughters to the sex-crazed Sodomites to ravish them rather than to take advantage of Lot's guest. How low they all stooped. The only time in the Bible that I think of something that's comparable to what Lot offered here is in Judges 19, and you might look at that story sometime. So we start off with the idea of insistence. Don't tarry, don't delay, don't have to pack up everything, just leave. The second part of our lesson focuses on the word hesitation. The very time when you say, this is urgent and we must do it now. In the Old Testament story involving David, there is an occasion when the prophet says to him, the Lord requires haste. Well, the Lord required haste here, but rather than hasting, they hesitated. We begin in verse 16. And while he lingered, the message Lot has heard is so urgent, so insistent, but he lingered while he delayed. While he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of their daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." And then Lot said to them, "Please, no, my lords. Indeed, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it's a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live." And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow this city for which you've spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." And therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The record is very clear about time references. If you go back a chapter or so, you can almost follow this on a daily basis. When the angels arrived in Sodom, it was evening. After that long and terrifying night, we read in verse 15, when the morning dawned. What they had experienced that night finally gave way to a dawn. Then the angels tried to hurry the family out of the city. Finally, the sun had arisen upon the earth when Lot arrived in Zoar. You can trace sunrise and sunset and sunrise and sunset. Much can happen in a small amount of time. And much happened here in a small amount of time. The angels were so insistent that something had to be done now. They grabbed them by the hands and pulled them out. When God calls, it's time to respond. It's not time to think about it. The angels were so determined, they led them out of the house and out of the city. Get away now while you can. They gave this family 3 directives. 1, escape for your life. If you don't respond now, you're going to die. 2, do not look behind you. Don't be drawn back. Number 3, don't wait in the plain, escape to the mountains. What it appears the angels are doing is maintaining a very sure separation. You don't delay, you get away, you can't just stay in the plains. Go all the way to the mountains, get as far away as you can. Escape to the mountains. Even then, Lot hesitated. Hesitation is one of his great weaknesses, apparently. He begged them, "Don't make me go to the mountains." And he uses the craziest logic. He says, "Lest I go to the mountain and some evil overtake me and I die." Where does he think he is right now? He's in Sodom, where some evil has overtaken him and he's about to die. But he begs for respite. There's a small town over here. It's not very big. Let me just go there and wait it out. The town is named Zoar. Its name means small. And the text says it was indeed small. Small both by name and perhaps by population. It was going to be a little place where Lot was going to put his future. And it's not a very good future. But that's what he begs for. Let me escape to the city. All that's going on around him has not convinced him that God would see to his survival. God, who had sent angels to bring him out, has been so patient with his situation. First, he had agreed with Abraham's request to spare Sodom if a reasonable number of righteous people could be found, but they weren't found. Now Lot asked to remain in the plain and not go to the mountain, and God relents, but he also directs, hurry, escape there. This passage begins with a sense of hurry and ends with hurry. Never have so few delayed their deliverance with such determination. It's as if Lot's going to do everything in his power not to be delivered or to delay it. And so he leaves to go to the city of Zoar, a small town. And finally, the end comes. It comes in fire and brimstone. Remember that passage from Psalm 11 that we read earlier? The passage said, "Upon the wicked he will rain coals. Fire and brimstone and a burning wind shall be a portion of their cup." Now the Lord rained fire and brimstone down on the cities. We begin reading in verse 23. The sun had arisen upon the earth when Lot entered Zoar. Was it the next day? Maybe so. Finally, he gets to Zoar. And then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Just as the psalmist had said, God is watching from the heavens. He sees what's going on. He sends the punishment as well. So he overthrew those cities of the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. His destruction was just as total for that region as it had been in the days of Noah and the flood. He destroyed all the people. He destroyed all 4 of those cities, Zoar excluded, and he destroyed all vegetation. Many have speculated over the years that the location of Sodom and Gomorrah might have been where the Dead Sea now exists. That cannot be proved, but it's an interesting speculation. It is so deprived of all life around there. Sounds like the description here. God destroyed the inhabitants and the cities and everything that grew in the ground. Burned up. We've seen places where a great fire has swept over an area and it's just devastated. It takes a long time for any life ever to reappear. But in the midst of all of that, we have one interesting little episode. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. We're given no further explanation for that, either here or later. My read of this is when she looked back, she was missing something. She looked back for what she had left behind her, as many people do. When they turn their lives around, they can't quite give up what was in the past. We know that she left behind daughters and sons-in-law, and likely sons. That bothered. She left behind friends. She might even have left behind her heritage. She might have been a native of Sodom, whom Lot married long after he arrived there. There is no reference to Lot's wife when he leaves to move into the areas of Sodom and Gomorrah. There was much that could draw her back. Let me make a distinction that I think we sometimes don't make. We carelessly say God turned her into a pillar of salt. The Bible doesn't say he turned her into a pillar of salt. She became a pillar of salt. Just as the land was devastated and lifeless and nothing could grow, salt, identified with the great salt sea, the Dead Sea, again is a sign of where that location might have been. So God has rained down coals and fire and brimstone, and everything is burned up. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. Everything destroyed. Lot's wife becomes memorable to us with her looking back. But she becomes even more memorable when Jesus uses her as an object lesson. When Jesus talks to people about the dangers that are coming and they refuse to accept his warnings about that coming destruction, he simply says, remember Lot's wife? That's Luke chapter 17, verse 32. Remember Lot's wife. Well, there's a lot of remembering that's going on here. God soon remembered Abraham too. We shift our focus back to Abraham, who early that morning walked out and looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and saw the smoke ascending. He knew what was happening. The angels had told him they would destroy those cities. Much of Lot's deliverance had come about by the great influence of the godliness of Abraham. And Abraham still cares about that young man and looks for him. So what can we draw from all of this? Obviously, the story focuses on the sin of homosexuality. It had characterized the men of Sodom. They were called Sodomites. It was a sin by men with men. Women are ignored. Even the offer of Lot's daughters was utterly ignored by the men. They wanted those two men more than anything. Paul addresses that sin in Romans chapter 1 and again in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, just as Chad notes in our lesson. Number 2, lessons from Lot remind us we need to stay as far away from evil as possible and never try to see how close we can get without being burned. He wrote in 1 Thessalonians, abstain from every form of evil. Number 3, this emphasis on the urgent and the call to haste stresses to us not to hesitate, not to dawdle, not to delay. When God speaks, our response needs to be quickly and fully. I think of Isaiah's call when he said, God said, whom can I send? Who will go for me? And Isaiah said, here am I, send me. That's the response God seeks. Once more, we are reminded of the importance of godly influences. Lot did not respect Abraham as he should have and continued making bad decisions and bad moves. The farther he moved from Abraham, the farther he moved from God. Our mentors in the faith need to be kept very close and respected and honored. And so we leave our study of Genesis at this point at a kind of low point. Some terrible things have happened, but one man and his daughters have survived. Tragically, what happens to them is memorable and sad. They leave Zoar before long and move into the mountains where Lot said he didn't want to go. He planted a vineyard. In time, the daughters got him drunk. He fathered a child by each one of them. Those people became the Moabites and the Ammonites, who were going to trouble the people of Israel for decades and centuries to come. Thank you for being in our study tonight. We look forward to continuing with the book of Genesis next Wednesday night, if God is willing. Good night.